thank you all for coming tonight. It's a little bit of a informal celebration of Northumberland's first beavers to set foot back on our land and water for 400 years. But Helen's going to talk a little bit more about that. So yes, they were released in July this year at National Trust Wallington Estate into an enclosure. So it's not a wild release, as I'll discuss soon. We can't have those just yet, but it's a really positive step forward. So just a bit of an overview of tonight, actually. I'm so sorry, I can't see my screen that's coming up, so I might do a bit of forward and back in because my memory isn't great. So I'll speak first, and then Helen's going to come up and give us an overview of the Wallington Beavers, and then there's going to be plenty of time for questions and statements, if you have any, at the end. Because, as Elise has already touched on, we don't have much kind of information in the ether out there about process-led conservation or restoration. But beavers have become a bit of a totem for this kind of process-led habitat restoration in particular. And that's why I'm here today. So thank you for my intro there. So yes, I've worked as the Cumbria Beaver Project Officer a few years ago now. Time does fly. And a lot of that involved speaking to communities about beavers that had just been released into an enclosure on the Lowther estate near Penrith. So it wasn't a consultation that I did that time. It was more, the beavers have arrived, let's talk about them. They're in an enclosure, so it's a great opportunity to get communities to actually learn about this species that's been missing. After I left my role there, I continued beaver engagement through Wild Intrigue, which is a community interest company that we run. You might have heard of us, you might have been on some of our experiences, but a lot of what we do behind the scenes is consultation based. So this image here is from the Wild Ennerdale Beaver consultation or engagement phase that we undertook in the Lake District. So that was a very exciting one to look ahead to. That would be a really large valley-wide restoration of beavers, and they'd have the entire Ennerdale Valley to themselves essentially. I haven't actually worked with Wallington for their beaver restoration. We're just starting to kind of link up together a little bit more now. But a lot of the engagement I've done has been for the likes of RSPB Scotland's Loch Lomond Beaver translocation. And again, it's more just talking to people and saying, what do you think about beavers? But admittedly, by the time that role is put into play, the way the system works currently, I'll stop being so boring soon and we'll get onto the beavers. But the way the system works in that sense, we're talking about beavers a little bit too late. We're talking about beavers when there's a licence application underway. And especially in the case of translocations in Scotland, communities might be loosely aware of beavers, but they don't have that really kind of underlying fact-based education in order to talk openly about beavers. So now that we have the Wallington enclosed trial, I'm really keen, I'm like a woman on a mission, I'm really keen that we just start this discussion about beavers more openly. This isn't me advocating the restoration of beavers. As you can probably tell, I am a little bit sided one way when it comes to restoring beavers. It's more just an opportunity to get the facts out there about the species that we haven't lived alongside for hundreds of years, so that we can start these discussions in our conservation organisations, but also in the general ether. Because as Elise touched on, these discussions aren't quite in the general ether yet, so we just need to get them going. And the beaver is brilliant for that. In between these consultations and engagement phases and just blethering at people about beavers non-stop, it's really important that we bring information from places that have been living alongside beavers for decades now. So a lot of the photos that are used in here and the videos, they are from our project in Scotland. I don't think there's any from the Lake District actually, but a lot of them are from Europe as well. So I'll just kind of dip into the learnings that I've gathered throughout the years been working with beavers for about 10 years or so now, throughout the years, and we're basing these discussions on this. So that's enough about me. Let's get to the beavers. So when we're talking about beavers, is anybody very familiar with beavers? Would you say you know about the species? I see a few nodding heads. I see someone proudly with their hand up there as well. Brilliant. But that's the point. Some of us know about them, some of us don't, so I'm just going to get it out that we're on a level playing field, basically. So we're going to go over the species ecology and how that links to their ecosystem impacts. So it's the Eurasian beaver that we have in Britain. It's only the Eurasian beaver, so that's castor fibre. There have been surveys undertaken throughout our watersheds, and we don't have the North American beaver, Castor canadensis, which is good news because we don't want that species. We want the species that our ecosystems evolved with. So Castor canadensis and castor fibre, they actually separated around about 7.5 million years ago, it's thought. And it's that long, basically, and longer still, that we have been living as humans alongside these ecosystem engineers. We've been adapting our lifestyle according to what they have done. And now it's only been 400 years that they've been absent from our shores. Now we kind of need to find ways of adapting to live alongside them again, and I'll discuss that a little bit later. But what's a beaver? A beaver is a rodent. It's the second largest rodent in the world. And as you can see, they're semi-aquatic. I mean, they are aquatic. I don't like saying semi-aquatic. They need water to live. Their entire livelihoods depend on water. And they're very social animals. So you tend to have an adult pair, which is monogamous. They do a lot of play fighting like this. A monogamous pair, and they'll tend to have 2 years' worth of kits that stay with them in a territory. So territories can be around about 6 to 12 individuals. They've finished playing now. And this is a beaver kit, of course. So the kits are born, they breed between December and February, and then the kits you tend to get after about 3-month gestation, like May to July time. So we'll keep our fingers crossed for the Wallington family at that point. But you do tend to have the 2 years worth of kits. They'll feed on the mother's milk for about 3 months, but they can eat vegetation from about a week or so. You don't see them for around a month after they're born because they'll stay in the lodge, which is where a lot of the family activity takes place. So this is in Saxony, Germany. This is quite a mega lodge, actually. It's very impressive. So this is obviously quite a stronghold for this territory, and they've been there for some years. So lodges will tend to have an underwater entrance, or several underwater entrances into the chambers, and they'll pile mud, they'll pile sticks onto the top of it, stones. I think a prosthetic leg was found on one once, so watch out. They'll pile anything on there that they can, and it keeps them nice and toasty because they don't hibernate, beavers. They remain active throughout the winter, but they do reduce that activity quite a lot, so they spend a lot of time as a family in those lodges. And I don't know if you've seen the children's book, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. I've got a bone to pick with him that I'll mention later. But a lot of the depictions there are smoke coming out of the beaver's lodge, which is actually not too far from the truth, because when it's nice and toasty inside and it's a cold winter's day, you do sometimes see this kind of warm steam emerging from it. So you can pretend it's them having a nice cosy fire if you really want to. But there's a lot happens inside that lodge there. Beaver anatomy. I could talk about beavers for a very long time, so I'm going to whip through these because I've got a lot of slides. And if I do miss something, be sure to ask me at the end, okay? So, beaver anatomy. It's their anatomy that's so long evolved that makes them perfect for the jobs of wetland engineering that we'll get to. But when you actually see a beaver, you wouldn't believe it, because they're not the most agile looking animals. In the water, that is where they kind of come into play. And this is generally, if you've been beaver watching before, this is what you've seen, just a log with a face essentially. If you're very fortunate, they will come onto the bank and you'll see them feeding, but this is generally what you see. So they can go by unnoticed quite a lot. It's got its nose, its eyes, its ears out of the surface there. It's all of its primary organs. They can't see very well at all, beavers. They only respond to movement, but they can't see if you're sitting on a bankside. They can't see you, but they will smell you. Their sense of smell is incredible, and their chemical communication in particular is really well evolved. So they rely on that, similar to badgers actually, very heavily. And their sense of hearing is great as well, despite them having tiny ears. I should also mention they have a nictitating membrane on their eyes, so when they go underwater, they can see, and their nostrils and ears have a mechanism that can close when they dive as well, because they can spend 15 minutes underwater, beavers, so that again, they're highly evolved for that aquatic lifestyle. They've got beautiful little hands. As I say, I'm a little bit biased. They've got 5 digits on the hands that they manoeuvre primarily for foraging, as you can see, as you saw before, for socialising. They groom each other and they do a lot of allopreening and the like. But their 4 paws or hands, they're not webbed, whereas their hind feet are webbed because, of course, aquatic lifestyle, they need those webbed feet to move through the water succinctly. They've got very thick fur. So they've got really soft, thick fur underneath and then guard hairs on the top to help with the waterproofing. And their fur, actually, if you imagine a postage stamp piece of beaver skin, it's got more fur on it than we have on the entire human head. And it's incredibly thick and warm, perfect for them staying active throughout the winter. Their tails are essentially how you identify individual beavers. So you can see they've got those lovely scales there, and when beavers have territorial disputes, they'll tend to chew each other's tails, so you get a lot of scarring that kind of remains for a long time on their tails, so you can identify individuals. They slap it on the surface of water as a like a predator warning that other beavers have recognised and other species can even recognise as a warning. They build it up to be nice and fat. So you can often see a really nice fat beaver tail when it's doing well. It's a sign of a beaver in good health. And in the summer it exudes heat, so it's a really important tool again for them managing their temperature. But of course it's their teeth that they're primarily known for. And yes, they are real beaver teeth. Not because they've been having too many sweets. They're born with this iron impregnated in their incisors, and at the back they have soft dentine which wears away over time. So beaver teeth continuously grow, so they're stimulated to gnaw, which of course they're known for, I'm sorry. And of course, I'm so sorry. That helps keep the teeth in check, but it also helps to create chisels as incisors, so it's just this very beneficial circuit. And they have these teeth because, again, they've co-evolved alongside trees, but they've co-evolved as natural coppicing mechanisms for trees. So they've co-evolved with trees in order to gnaw them. But beavers generally, this is what you'll see them eating. Between spring and summer, 90% of the diet on average, it's between 70 to 90 depending on the area. Norway is less, for example, but 90% of the diet is on this soft herbaceous terrestrial aquatic vegetation. So here it's eating, well, they eat willow, they eat birch. They're not very fond of aspen. They don't like that, and they don't really like oak. But again, it depends on the beaver. So I've been to the Lowther enclosure before, and it had taken a rowan, but then it took an aspen as well, and there was plenty of other choice. So no matter what I'm telling you, take it with a little bit of a pinch of salt, because every beaver site you go to, it ends up being slightly different. So I'm always keen to say that's not definitely the case. So they'll eat aquatic vegetation like this. They actually graze grass, and when you come across this incredible sort of dynamic, messy, I'm going to emphasise dynamic, beaver habitat, and it's got this really neat mowed lawn. It looks very odd, but they do spend a lot of the time grazing grass. It's nice and easy, and it's got enough nutrition for them. And it tends to be autumn that they'll switch to this woody diet. So this is generally what it looks like, and I'm sure Elise would be interested in this actually. I'm sure in your head there, as soon as that image popped up, an immediate word came to your head, and everybody will have a different word in their head for that. Some I've heard is devastation, some I've heard is exciting, some I've heard is great. You know, everybody's got a different word for that, and this is what it generally looks like. But there are secrets unfolding in all of these tiny little influences that beavers have. So when you look really close on a beaver node tree like this, especially on the onset of autumn where there's still some sap running, you do find a heck of a lot of invertebrate life. So, I mean, wasps, I'm aware some people don't like wasps. I really need a better kind of like a beautiful butterfly or something there, I think. But wasps are brilliant pollinators as well, and they're very important for the food chain, of course. So we came across a whole swarm of wasps around this freshly gnawed beaver tree that was still thick with sap. And as these trees start to kind of go through the process of either coppicing or dying in particular, you find this, it's hard to describe, you find this incredibly ever-changing dynamic even on the bark. So ichneumon wasps in particular, they take up a lot of the kind of dying beaver flooded trees. But it's the coppicing that's really important when it comes to beavers gnawing, and it's a service, of course, that we've taken on as humans, probably with a bit of inspiration from our furry friends. But when they fell a tree like this, they tend to prefer to fell a tree that's about 50 centimetres in diameter, but they can fell one around a metre in diameter, so they can fell very large trees, but they tend to prefer the smaller ones. When you've got the larger standing trees like this, it regrows as a shrubby undergrowth, and again you get this really diverse structure alongside wetland edges where beavers occur. I've got a few better pictures to illustrate that point, but it also creates these openings in the canopy. And with that, they've found that a lot of species like willow tip move in. So you've got your standing deadwood habitat that, of course, your willow tips need. And then around that, you've got these open kind of glades as well. So finding a lot of different species take on these particular glades. So again, a word might come to your mind here, but I'm kind of putting this picture up because a lot of folk end up seeing beaver habitats in winter, and it can look like this. So this is an aerial image, I should say, on the Banff estate in Perthshire. So they've had beavers there for just over 20 years or so now. So if you do want to visit a beaver habitat, this is one of the best ones to go to because it's very well established. So you can see some fresh gnawing up there. The chippings are a dead giveaway that it's still quite fresh because they haven't absorbed back into the soil yet, which obviously enhances the nutrients of the soil in itself. You can see some of the dams that I'll chat about soon. But ultimately, again, quite a few people refer to this as devastation. And it's one of those words that I do completely... I don't necessarily agree with, but I completely appreciate it because it can look incredibly dramatic. We're just not used to coming across this habitat. We're used to nature reserves that have been kept beautifully and their habitats have remained quite similar for quite a few years. We're just starting to change that way of thinking now. So if you step into a habitat like this that has been completely designed by this species, it can be quite daunting. But if you go back in summer, this is what it can look like. And this is why they're known as ecosystem engineers. So where the beaver wetland is here, you can see all of, sorry, I'm forgetting to use my mouse, you can see all of this beautiful greenery along the bottom. And that's because they're felled trees along here, and you've got a really thick shrubby underlayer, but it's primarily herbaceous flowers and the like. So it's because of the beaver's anatomy that they are able to create these incredible ecosystem services for us, such as the coppicing of trees. But in reality, a beaver habitat doesn't always look like this. In reality, the majority of beaver habitats look like this. And there's a particular stretch of the Tyne that I walk along quite often, and I always think back to this picture. So this is the River Danube in Bavaria. It's on the border on Bavaria. And this is one of the strongholds for beavers. It's got one of the longest standing beaver territories in the area. And I don't know if you can see them there, personally, but I intentionally took it so that you could a little bit. So their lodge is just in here. But otherwise, the beavers have been there for years now, decades. But otherwise, there isn't a devastation of trees. The trees haven't all been felled. The bankside hasn't completely eroded away. There are a lot of statements that we hook onto that are based on a very few niche number of examples. But in reality, we need to consider all of these beaver habitats if we're going to make statements about them. I'm just going to put that out there very politely. So this is generally what beavers will do, because they need a depth of water to feel secure. They need around 70 centimetres to a metre of water to feel safe. They evolved alongside wolves and lynx and bears. They still do here. Of course, they don't in Britain now. Not yet, anyway. I don't know if anyone's given a talk on anything else controversial soon. But they still have that stimulated response to have that depth of water because they've evolved along these animals for millions of years. And humans. It's actually thought that beavers are nocturnal because of the human threat as well. Because, of course, bears, lynx and wolves, they come out at night, whereas we hunted, I should say, during the day. If beavers need to create that depth of water, so the majority of habitats that they prefer are that main channel system of a river. They're wide, open, deep lakes. That's their prime habitat, and that is what a beaver will go to initially, particularly if, helpfully, they're reintroduced in that area. So they will establish in that area, and then once all of that prime habitat is taken up, that's when they'll head to the suboptimal habitats. So these are the drainage ditches and things. And that is where a beaver might be stimulated if there isn't that depth of water to create dams. And again, this is what they're known for. So this is the Banff estate. So beavers respond to changing hydrology incredibly quickly. So this is actually the natal dam on the Banff estate. So it's really important that the beavers keep this dam tip-top, because this is where the lodge is. This is where their safety net is. So they'll do that. They'll pull up mud from the base of the watershed. They'll pack it onto the dams, and they'll stick sticks in toward the flow of the water so that it strengthens its integrity, and it becomes this really complex network. This is generally what it looks like. So places like Banff are on a bit of an extreme scale, because they're wilding there. So they've allowed the beavers to kind of have the run of the place, which is excellent because they have the space to do that. Where we don't necessarily have the space to do it, this is what beaver dams will essentially look like in practice. So this is in Bavaria again, where a third of the world's hops is produced, along with beet. And I don't know about you, but I quite like my beer. And if hops wasn't being produced, I would be quite sad, personally. So in Bavaria, they've had a very long journey to actually learn to coexist alongside beavers, landowners in particular. But now, since I think it was 2017, I believe, they've just started to learn to keep the dams there. And that has been because they've been talking to one another. So farmers are now actively keeping the dams there, but with management. So you can install a pipe through called a flow device. you install a pipe through here, and then at the back where the water is compounded, where the beavers have that nice depth of water, you put a cage around it so the beavers can still respond to that stimulation to dam, but it's against the cage, it's not against the pipe. So you can have all of the benefits of this compounded water, so your drought resilience and your attenuated flow and things like that. You can have all of that and your wildlife benefits, of course, but it doesn't flood your field. And this is exactly what they're starting to do in Bavaria and across Europe. And these are the things that we really need to start thinking about when it comes to managing our landscapes now, for when the beavers arrive. I won't bang on about that too much. But again, I don't know if you can spot the beaver dam here, but they essentially become living systems in themselves. So this is the dam, this is on Banff Estate again. They become bridges and corridors for all sorts of wildlife in themselves, and they become integrated. And that vegetation that grows, it's generally the willow that the beavers have put in place, and of course it sprouts and then it grows into the system itself. They can become really, really strong, especially if they're managed continuously by the beavers. When beavers create a slightly longer dam, this is the Banff Estate again, they put this lovely curve to it. They know what they're doing. Every dam like this has this beautiful curve. Who doesn't love curves, right? And that is because they've evolved alongside some very extreme climatic and weather events that we are just starting to, again, see quite a peak of now. So they've learned that if you whack a straight dam in and a flush of water comes, it's just going to smash the entire dam out. So what they do, they put this curve in so that this section where it's muddy, this was flushed out during, I think it was Storm Arwen, but where it's green here, it continues all the way along. So a section of the dam remained, and then they got to work, and over 3 nights, a family of beavers managed to rebuild it to that height. It doesn't do it justice how high that dam actually is, so they work through the night, quite literally of course, to rebuild it. And they'll use a lot of the materials that have been flushed out, and they'll fell new trees if they need to, but this is the magic of beavers essentially. Again, like I said, I'm a little bit one-sided, aren't I? I do take in the problems that come with beavers as well, but I'm just going to put all the benefits out first. So this is the benefit of them massively, because the cost and the time, the staff capacity needed to reinstate a flood defence system like that would just be innumerable on a catchment scale. Whereas if you've got these creatures that live there and do it naturally, and they respond to the flow of the water and change their dam systems accordingly, this is exactly what we need in our upper catchments at the moment. Because the beavers here, they've got, forgetting my marker again, sorry. They've got one dam here, and then their natal dam is further upstream, and they've got a few more, and they build them up into this like complex tiered network. It's never just a dam and then a dam and then a dam. They tend to build them up in this complex tiered network, and that stores the water, but it also really vastly slows the flow of water downstream. So Woodland Valley Farm down in Cornwall, Chris Jones, who manages an enclosed beaver trial there, they actually found that when before the beavers came in, his water was rushing through his farm. It took 15 minutes, for the water to get from one side of the farm to the other. And then when the beavers were introduced, it took an hour. So it really slowed it down. And again, the Lowther estate, they've had water for livestock during serious periods of drought because of the beaver enclosure. So they're this huge defence mechanism that we really need to integrate back in where we can. Oh, I won't talk for much longer. There's another secret that beavers have. So they create channels, and this is a secret because it's under the water, so they'll go under and they'll use those really strong forearms to push mud up like this. It looks great, doesn't it? They're really strong animals, and they're doing this to deepen the channel to move through, to bring all of those building materials they need from the trees and to access new foraging ground if necessary. But it's those channels in particular, it's not the slide I was expecting. It's those channels in particular that help to capture more water and to hold water back in the landscape, which is what we need. So there are obvious, huge wildlife benefits. We've lost around 90%, well, it's estimated 70 to 90% of our natural wetlands in Britain, which is just unacceptable. So that's either by direct drying, I can't think of the word, sorry, direct drying, or just through loss itself. Beavers are being advocated as a solution, one solution to restore these wetlands. And the brilliant thing about them is that they create these dynamic wetlands that, again, respond to things that we just cannot respond to. And with that, every beaver habitat you go to, the wildlife is different, and every season you go, it's changed. And if you go the year after, the wildlife will have changed just slightly again. So you get the likes of bats being restored in beaver habitats through flooded trees. They create these cavities, of course, that the likes of pipistrelles and noctules can roost in. There's one beaver site that found 11 new bat species in its beaver habitat. It's just mind-blowing, isn't it? Because they create this essential network that's necessary. I'm going to put a more positive picture on what I'm talking about. Again, the willow tits and gargany have been found to come back to beaver meadows in particular because they need that really complex wetland habitat where they can rear their young and where they can essentially have their nest within this flooded landscape. There's all sorts of benefits. Water voles as well. They've learnt to evade mink in beaver habitats because there's a lot more complexity in the structure there. And mink, of course, have hunted water voles again, around 90% alongside pollution incidents and the like. So I could go on about that, but I won't because I really want Helen to actually talk. There's a lot of benefits when it comes to beavers. They far outweigh the negatives in the vast majority of cases, and there is a huge amount of underlying research alongside this now on the Beaver Trust website in particular that I'd recommend you look at if you're interested. To live alongside them, we do need to manage them, particularly in areas where we can't just let them have free rein. We do need to influence some, input some management there. So that includes the likes of tree guards. If you've got a beautiful orchard, they do like an apple tree. If you've got a beautiful orchard, you can defend your trees with the likes of tree guards or with sand paint, which is the same colour of the tree and it's non-toxic. I actually find that much more aesthetically pleasing than the tree guards personally. And the flow devices as well. So you can have all of those benefits of the beaver dams, but you can also have your active farmland or your public footpath or your McDonald's, as is the case in Perth, where there's a beaver habitat. You can have whatever you like neighbouring it. But in places like Bavaria, we'd really need to learn from the lessons that they're already teaching there. So this is in an agricultural college in Bavaria. So they've got an active crop rotation at the back, and the college is this side toward us. And in the middle of it, beavers moved in. And they've used that as an opportunity to teach upcoming farmers, particularly the younger generation, about coexisting with beavers and all of the benefits that they can bring and how you can manage them in a sustainable, ethical way as well, which I found very inspiring actually. And there are landscapes across Bavaria that look very much like this. So like I say, it's heavily farmed, but you look for the trees and that is where the beavers are. The beavers are creating these luscious habitats that do have the standing deadwood. This was in October. But they actually re-establish a lot of this vegetation and tree life as well. So again, they're supporting them within the middle of farm boundaries. They've given space for beavers and nature. And places like Spain's Hall Estate in southern England are visiting these sites and bringing the experience back here. So Archie Ruggles Bryce, who owns the estate, his village downstream was suffering flooding, so the water company were quite keen to look at ways, quite pricey ways, to help mitigate and prevent that flooding. Archie had just been on a field trip to Bavaria, which obviously gained him massive inspiration because this looks very much like the valley that I've just shown you there. So the water company actually helped him establish an enclosed beaver trial there and monitor the impacts that it's having on the downstream village catchment. And the results so far have been incredibly positive, so much that he's actually got 2 more beaver enclosures on his site. Because as he puts it, the beavers are coming here and they're essentially employees. They're doing an incredible job. So from a landowner perspective, you know, you don't need to have people on the ground if you've got these species doing it for you. It's not just rural catchments. There are urban catchments that we, in particular, of course, in Newcastle, can learn from. So this is Berlin that we visited on a beaver study trip. I've lost track of time. I think it was a month ago. And you might be able to see the beaver impact there. So you can see a fallen tree there. But in Berlin, I think there's about 7 million people live in Berlin, and they didn't get on with the beavers to begin with, but they've learnt to live alongside them by applying the likes of this non-toxic sand paint again on the trees. And that's working brilliantly because the beavers are in here, in the it's just like a little burn that runs through that leads to the ponds. The beavers are in there, but they're eating the vegetation, not the trees. But as you can see here, we thought that this was a beaver, but the branch had actually snapped off the tree up above and the beavers had gnawed it. You can see these fresh gnaw marks here. So they're taking advantage of recycling the wood that falls, but they will not chew through that glue paint at all. So in a city of millions of people, it's very heavily infrastructured. They've learned to live along, or they're still learning to live alongside the beavers. So even when it comes to places like Newcastle, we can get some inspiration from these sites as well. Because as I say, the benefits, what they've realised in all of the sites I've visited across Europe, the benefits far outweigh the perceived and the actual risks. And that's largely down to the education of the community. Every member of the community I spoke with in Bavaria, whether it was farmers, it was the mayor, it was beaver project officers, education has been absolutely key, and discussions have been key in actually living happily alongside the beavers. And again, Bavaria have this incredible system where they have beaver project officers, which is something that I'm just kind of really keen for us to start discussing a bit more openly before beavers arrive, because they had to deal with it and then establish the project officers. The same things happened in Perth in Scotland. They had to deal with the beavers that just arrived and then have a system in place after. But in Bavaria they have hundreds of beaver project officers now. It used to take 3 weeks for a farmer to get a flow device added. Now it takes about a day. And this is what's needed here so that we can respond really quickly and get the benefits of beavers. I'm going to whip through these because I'm going well over time. In time, we can learn to enjoy the beavers, such as the Biesbosch National Park in the Netherlands, who rely heavily on the beavers for their ecotourism. So they manage recreation alongside nature restoration very successfully there. Beavers in Britain. I'm going to whip through it and then we can have some questions at the end if necessary. This is a map taken off the Beaver Trust website. In Scotland there, these are some sites where you can visit beavers. Some of them you can just rock up and see them because they're wild living. Some of them you should get permission for. And down in the south, of course, there's a bit of a gap, isn't there? There's a bit of a gap there that we might talk about soon. But the status of beavers in Britain, in Scotland, they have just permitted free-living translocations of beavers. So across Scotland and England, beavers are a European protected species now. They have the highest level of protection. Scotland got it first, and then England got it after 2020, I think it was. In Scotland, they can translocate beavers from the likes of the Tay catchment into areas like this, which is the Argati Red Kite Trial, which I'd very much recommend visiting if you can. And the Loch Lomond, of course, RSPB Scotland Loch Lomond have just translocated a family of beavers to their nature reserve as well. In England, we're a little bit behind in that sense. So in England, we can only get licenses to release beavers into an enclosure. So there's been discussions ongoing between scientists and the Beaver Trust and conservation organisations and anglers and farmers with the government for years now. And there was even a national campaign put out by the government to gather people's feedback on free-living beavers. And the results of that were overwhelmingly positive, so long as you have management plans in place for the beavers. But recently, you might have seen that the Environment Secretary stated that that's essentially been halted, and she actually mentions that the legal protection of beavers in England might even be rescinded. So we're at an incredibly precarious time for beavers, which is so frustrating. It's very frustrating for a lot of people, but it's why the likes of the National Trust's enclosed release is so pioneering, because the National Trust have been the first organisation, the first organisation in Northumberland to come forward and say, yeah, we'll have an enclosed trial on our land. And it's such a brilliant opportunity for us to learn about this species together, to start talking about them, whether you approve of beavers being restored or not. Regardless, they will show up at some point or another in the future, so we do need to start talking about them now. So I'm going to hand over to Helen MacDonald, Lead Ranger at National Trust Wallington, who will tell us about their new beaver family.
Thank you. Lead Ranger at Wallington for the National Trust. And this is just to show you kind of where Wallington sits in context with the Wansbeck catchment. So the red line is the Wansbeck catchment, and the purple line is the boundary of Wallington. I don't know if you've been to Wallington before. It might have been to the house and wall garden and the beautiful gardens, and that's just a tiny little patch down here. So the whole of Wallington is 13,500 acres, so about 21 square miles, so pretty big. There's 15 farms on the estate, quite a lot of woodland and forestry, and a lot of watercourses running through it. And we've been working in a partnership, the Wansbeck Restoration for Climate Change Partnership, working to restore nature and natural processes in the Wansbeck catchment. And the reintroduction of beavers is just one element of this. We've got a wider project called Wild Wallington, and I'll just go through this really quickly because our project manager, Elaine Moore, is going to come in and give a talk about that, the Wild Wallington project in December, so you can hear all about that then. But the reintroducing beavers is just one element of all the work that's going on. So there's quite a big ambition across Wallington, a lot of habitat restoration and creation. Lots going on, but beavers is what we're here to talk about. So back to that. To release beavers in Wallington, we work quite closely very closely with the Beaver Trust, who came to run a feasibility study in 2021, looking at 7 sites across Wallington and assessing them for their vegetation and their access to water, looking at the flow rates of the water, and where beavers where would be a priority to release beavers. If anyone knows the estate, there's a big lake, Rossley Lake, which would have been a lovely place to release beavers, but we wanted them to start building dams and to create more wetland habitat. So we thought if we released them at Rossley Lake, they would just enjoy the lake. They've got everything there. They wouldn't do any work for us. So we've put them in. It's on a farm. It's where there's 2 burns that run through it. They've got a mixture of woodland and a bit of pasture as well within the enclosure. So the enclosure that we're decided on is 24 hectares, so quite a big enclosure. Before the release could happen, we wanted to get a baseline of the species that were there so that we could track and monitor the impacts and the influences that the beavers were having on the habitat. So working with some more partners with really specialist skills, which was brilliant. So we've got a really good, a strong population of white-clawed crayfish at Wallington in a lot of the water courses and into the Wansbeck. And we wanted to see, not a lot of work has been done. There's not many studies on the impacts that beavers have on white-clawed crayfish. So we've got Ian Marshall from the Environment Agency is running a project to track the crayfish population in the burns, and sort of how they're spread out and how their communities form, and if that's going to change as the beavers alter the water courses. The Tyne Rivers Trust have been brilliant, helped with electrofishing to identify the fish species and the size that we've got in the burns before the release. And again, that's something we'll do monitor over time as well. Same with kick sampling for invertebrates. So there was a botanical survey of the whole of the enclosure, and some of the Natural History Society botany group came out to help with that, which was fantastic. So they've mapped the whole area with all the different sort of vegetation classifications, and again we can see how that changes. Northumberland Rivers Trust have installed some flow meters along the burns a year before the beavers were released, so we've got all that data, and not counting the flood we had on Friday, we're hoping that the flow becomes slower, well, as the beavers build dams. And then spatial mapping, so Newcastle University did some 3D laser mapping of the site, and the Tyne Rivers Trust again did some drone footage, so we'll be able to capture over time the sort of the physical changes in the water courses. So it was important for us to get sort of a baseline so we can see what impacts the beavers are having. All the work to build the beaver enclosure was funded by the Rees Foundation, who've been really supportive of not just the beaver reintroduction, but a lot of the different the peatland restoration and hedgerow planting, woodland creation at Wallington. But yeah, the Rees Foundation funded the enclosure. It's a lot of engineering went into it. So this here is one of the grills that goes across the stream to stop the beavers swimming out down the river or up the river. So we've got 3 of those. We've got 2 inflows and 1 outflow. So they're really big pieces of engineering. And after the flooding this weekend, they're still in place. So the contractors have done a fantastic job because there was an awful lot of water. And then obviously the fencing runs all the way around the enclosure with an overhang and a skirt underneath again, because as Heather was saying, beavers can dig really well. They're also really good climbers, so they could climb out too. So yeah, a lot of work went into that to getting that right. And then the release, yeah. So the beavers were brought from Tayside in Scotland, relocated. It was a family of 4, so mum, dad and 2 young ones. And they were released in July. And then straight away we started to see them exploring around the enclosure. We've got about 20 different trail cameras around the enclosure to try and capture what they're doing and where they're going. And yet they went all the way around with the youngest one just following its parents. So swimming right up to the grills. This is this is one of the grills in the stream. So yeah, they explored all the way around the enclosure. And then in this one, you can start to see they're starting to gather some branches and build dams. So post release monitoring, we check the fences for security twice a week to make sure badgers haven't dug underneath, which they have. And we've had to install 6 metre lengths of pipe, so to get the badgers to use the pipes. But if beavers are looking to escape, they'll walk along the fence line and they won't look at this hole that's 6 metres in. So we've learnt that from some of the beaver enclosures in the country that have had the same issue, and that's worked well. We'll put some peanut butter into the pipe and that got the badgers going in there. So yeah, they've worked out a way to get in and out, and the beavers haven't. So yeah, checking the fences twice a week, and then checking the beavers themselves on trail cameras to check that their body weight's right, how it should be. If we can see their tails, we can see you know, if they're storing enough fat. Their eyes, ears, they're not lame, anything like that. So just to see that there's signs that they're healthy, and there's a lot of signs that they're active as well. So straight away they started to gnaw trees and feed. We found that they really like angelica and sweet cicely. They like eating that, and meadow sweet. So we see lots of remains of that. And then they did start building a dam. So this dam, that was in August, so about after a month, they built this dam on one of the widest parts of the river. And then maybe it doesn't look that much different, but it got to about 4 or 5 foot high. It's holding an awful lot of water back there, which is amazing. There's a series of 4 dams as well, as Heather was saying. There's a complex of dams up the river, and in the past that river has come through with such a force that it's sort of made a channel. It's eroded a channel, but now the dam is raising the water table, and the water's coming up out of the channel and starting to spread across what would have been the floodplain. And then yet also doing a lot of coppicing forests. We're seeing lots of nibbled little stumps there. You can tell because they've got the grooves of the teeth. I brought a stick with me if anyone would like to see. It's got the teeth marks on it and where they've been chewing the bark. But yeah, so there's lots, I think, there's lots to see and lots changing. I haven't actually seen a beaver yet myself. But just going and checking the cameras and seeing the impacts that they're having, the pools that are being created. We've seen dragonflies starting to lay eggs in some of the pools, and Heather was seeing other animals using the dams. We've seen rats going through. We saw a mole crossing a dam. We saw a mole swimming as well. Didn't know moles could swim. The crayfish as well, interacting, and crayfish crawling over the dams. So yeah, we're finding out a lot, and yeah, a lot more about the wildlife in that area as well. So just really interesting, and we want to start sort of next spring. We want to start bringing people in to see that as well. So we'll be working with Heather and Kane to hopefully run some tours into the enclosure, so more people can come and see what we're seeing, and we can share it further.